My name is Donna Dietz, and I teach at American University in Washington, D.C. One of our most popular courses for liberal arts math is our Great Ideas in Mathematics course, which I've now taught several times. American University has about 7,000 undergraduates. The students who end up being advised into this course tend to be bright overall, but they somehow have developed math phobias prior to their arrival. So they arrive eager and willing to learn and participate in class, but they get very nervous about exams. I'd like to informally rename my talk, not just for math majors anymore. Because if you do a website search about projective geometry, you'll see that it mostly shows up in courses designed for math majors. But the topic lends itself very well to everyone. Basically, once you're old enough not to eat paper when it's handed to you, then you're ready to study projective geometry. I first became interested in this topic a little over a year ago after Amazon told me that I should buy the game Spot It. For those of you who haven't seen this game yet, it has 55 round cards that on the back side each contain 8 symbols like this. What makes this interesting is if you draw any 2 cards out of the deck, those 2 cards will have exactly one symbol in common. For example, what about this pair? What is it? Right, it's a spider. Here's another pair of cards. Do you see the common symbol between these 2 cards? They're different sizes, but yes, it's the tree. Great. Okay, so Spot It games are great for playing with young children because they can legitimately beat you even when you're trying your best. Since this talk is only 15 minutes long, I can't go into detail about each of these possible learning objectives, but I want to assure you that this topic is ripe for all these learning objectives and more. I'm going to focus on just a few aspects that I emphasize with my students. Projective geometry really engages the students, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. For my students, whenever I bring in my little classroom sets of scissors or glue to class, they automatically perk up. Projective geometry lends itself especially well to these things, colored pencils, drawings, arranging things on their desks. They really like that. I've also written some online apps to help them both in and out of the classroom. The apps are in JavaScript, so they work across all devices, including their phones if they have them. They like that this topic is based off a game, and it's very visually appealing. There's only a few formulas, and they come after we already feel comfortable with the projective geometry. And finally, I think that this is nice because it's a totally new topic for all my students. Most topics I teach, there's always a few students who have already done it before, and this can flare up some of the insecurities in the other students who haven't done it before. This doesn't happen with projective geometry. Now I'm going to show you something about the Spot It deck. I want to show you so that you can see how easily projective geometry leads you into questions and answers that are just perfect for liberal arts students. If I hand you the deck of cards and ask you to pull out all the spider cards, this is what you'll get. And I will leave it as a little mystery. You can read my paper, but this is enough information that you can then tell me that there are 57 symbols in the deck. The proof is really easy, and your students will understand it too. If you want to know more about what you can do with this deck, which is the Order 7 Projective Geometry, you should go to my website and grab a copy of my preprint that's about to appear in Eureka. It turns out that there are 57 points in a finite projective plane of order 7, not 55, so there's actually 2 missing cards in the deck. And in my paper I talk about how to find those 2 missing cards, and then to take them and the other 55 cards and arrange them into a nice order so that you could easily visually verify that the cards do indeed form a projective geometry. It turns out it's mathematically easy to create such a deck, but once it's been shuffled, it takes a little bit of finesse to unshuffle it, even though there are a multitude of ways to unshuffle it correctly. I'm going to move on to the actual activities I do with my students. The first activity I started with, I gave them scissors and a piece of paper like this, except that instead of 13 cards, 2 were missing. So they had 11 little cards once they were done cutting, and they had to figure out what was missing. This is a perfect icebreaker, and it worked very well for a group activity. I had to give them some hints and not make it totally open-ended, but if I had math students, then I could have probably left it more open-ended. But with hints, they were totally fine. Once we had the missing cards in hand, I asked them to pick a symbol, and in this case, you can see the symbol I highlighted. remove the 4 cards containing that symbol and push it off to the side like I've done here. I've pushed them to the bottom of the page. Then I asked them to arrange the remaining 9 cards in a 3x3 grid so that each column and each row and each diagonal contained a common symbol. I didn't tell them, though, that once you get the rows and columns, the diagonals come along for free. I want to draw your attention here to this type of diagonal that wraps around. So actually that 3x3 grid is actually on a torus. And this is a little thing that takes a little bit of effort to explain this to the students. But if I just take that 3x3 grid and duplicate it right to left, you can see that that diagonal is really there. So instead of telling my students it's a torus, I just tell them it's a soup can label, and that you could either wrap the soup can top to bottom or left to right, wrap the label top to bottom or left to right, and if it forms a diagonal on the wrapped label, then it's a diagonal. They get that. So this set of cards that I've just arranged here, this arrangement is one of 5,616 correct configurations. So you'd think that they could just stumble upon this by chance, but in the context of this, teaching a class, it won't happen. Even if you just pull out 4 of the 13 cards, you have less than a 2% chance that those 4 cards will have the same symbol on them. So when you get down to arranging the 3x3 grid, your chances get even smaller and smaller. So if the students arrange the cards correctly, you can be assured it wasn't just random, but they still may not completely understand what they did. I want you to notice here that all the vertical sets are made up of solid green symbols. And those 3 symbols meet together on one of the discarded cards. And the same thing happens for the horizontal sets. You notice that these 3 horizontal families are all basically red, and they get together on a card as well. Also, the downward sloping diagonal and the upward sloping diagonal, they have the same property. So really the easiest strategy is to just set your horizontal and vertical families, and then the other 2 properties come along for free. You don't have to try to set those. Obviously you have a Cartesian grid, so once you have the rows and columns, the other 2 either work or don't, and they always will. If you draw out the graphs that represent the relationship between the cards in this order 3 deck, you get this type of thing. If you just look at the 3x3 grid off to the right, that's the affine plane. In the affine plane, we can talk about having 4 sets of 3 parallel lines, each containing 3 points. This gives n squared points and n squared plus n lines. If you look at the 13 cards as a whole, which is represented by the graph on the left, you have the whole finite projective plane, and these orange points are the 4 cards we threw away at the beginning. You can just take each parallel set from the affine plane and extend it. So for example, the black lines get extended off into gray lines, and the red lines get extended into pink lines. And these lines that are parallel, they join up together on a new point on what we call the infinity line. So the orange points are the infinity points, and the orange curvy line, that's the infinity line. So you just bring one new line into the system to create the finite projective plane, but you create, in this case, 4 new points. Oh yes, and the finite projective planes also exhibit this fabulous duality. So mathematically, it doesn't matter which things are the points and which things are the lines. What you have here is each line is incident with 4 points, and each point is incident with 4 lines. You can remove any arbitrary line from the finite projective plane to get back to the affine plane, but of course it's easiest to remove the orange one in this case, just artistically. The biggest challenges I found with this topic was that since the self-similarity is so high and the options for right answers are so great, it takes a while to actually figure out if a student understands the concept fully or not. They're not arranging the cards by chance, but it's just that they can mess around a little bit until it works, and since it's easier to verify this problem than to solve it, they can use a little bit of intuition plus verification rather than actually solving it. But they know this is what they're doing, and this makes them uncomfortable. So this is why I wrote the apps to help them study. This way they can keep moving the cards around endlessly, honing in on the strategies we talk about in class with the rows and the columns being set. I first wrote this in Java, but I found out, much to my surprise, that many of the students did not have Java on their laptops. Big surprise to me. So I rewrote it in JavaScript, and now works on anything, even my own old Kindle. I also made a YouTube video to help my students review for the exam. I have to show you this bit of artwork from Maxime Bourrigan's article. This is what the order 2 deck would look like. And it has a special name, maybe you know this graph, it is called a phonoplane. 6 of the lines actually look like lines, and only 1 looks like a circle. So if you have students who are struggling with the idea that lines don't have to be straight, this is a good thing to do with them to help them get over that little hump. And of course, this article is in French, and over in France, spot it is called double. If you can buy a few of these decks, you might consider buying a couple spotted decks, children's spotted decks. They actually have 6 symbols on each card instead of 8. They're based off of the order 5 projective plane, and they come in letters, numbers, and animals. So that's something to think about. Now I want to pause and just summarize here because I know you've heard a million talks already today and your brain is getting full. But I want you to remember that n needs to be prime. Okay, that's a lie, but that's what I tell my students. It's mostly true. And any arbitrary pair of cards has exactly 1 symbol in common, and any arbitrary pair of symbols is together on exactly 1 card. These 3 axioms are enough to allow your students to figure out most of the exercises that you will want to give them. Here's some exercises, for example. This is the question that seemed to perform best. It wasn't too easy or too hard. I just gave them 13 cards, but I used letters instead of symbols, so it was easier for the exam. Then I just asked them to lightly cross out the cards which are going to be the infinity line and redraw the remaining 9 cards. They got really good at that problem. The biggest problem was convincing them to use my cards instead of making their own set, but that was only a few students. For the order 5 problem, I mirrored the activities that I had them do with the order 3 problem, but I built in more hints. So for the missing cards question, I told them which symbols were missing to save them from having to do an inventory on all the symbols and figure out how often each one showed up. Again, this was excellent for group work. Even at this point, several students were struggling with the idea that there could be 2 different kinds of diagonals, especially like slope 1 minus 1 versus, like at slope 2 minus 2. These same students would probably have no trouble plotting y equals x and y equals minus x. Even though they're math phobic, they are quite a bit more competent than they give themselves credit for. So I'm not really sure what causes this issue when they deal with the discrete geometry, but the same problem happens between plus and minus 1 and plus and minus 2. So I'm not sure why, but as we progress in this unit, the students do develop a deeper understanding of what's going on, and the main axioms sink in finally, and they use these axioms to solve the problems at hand. Like the previous order 3 problem, I have a video for the order 5 problem. It explains a lot about how to arrange the cards or fill in missing symbols and things like that. There are lots of different ways you can word these questions about finding missing symbols, finding missing cards, finding parallel sets in the affine plane. It helps when the symbols are arranged in a nice regular pattern so it's obvious where the missing ones are supposed to be, as opposed to, say, doing this. It's kind of confusing. And students prefer having the infinity line present, so they really prefer having the finite projective plane rather than being just given the affine plane. If I had an hour, I could go into more detail about so many aspects of this topic. I have been very excited to be teaching it. It's a very flexible topic with regards to what level of students you have versus what there is to do with projective geometry, and the students have responded very well to this topic as well. They even nominated for an award that I won last year because of the apps I wrote to go along with this unit. If you haven't figured this out, I have a webpage. Visit me there, and I'm more than happy to talk to you in person or over email about this. It's a topic I'm really excited about, and I hope more people can enjoy teaching it to liberal arts students. Thank you.